Today is April 22nd, 2025. My name is Parwana Karimi. I will be interviewing Dr. Duong today for her oral history on behalf of the Asian American Archives at Rice University. Dr. Duong, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you please state your name, where and when you were born, and where did your story begin?
All right, okay. My name is Wendy Duong. I live in Houston right now, but I was born in Hội An, a port town of South Vietnam. I was born Dương Như Nguyệt, that's my Vietnamese name. And I spent my adolescence and teenage days in South Vietnam, in Hội An, where I was born. Mm-hmm. I left there when I was about 4 years old, and then we lived in Hue, the imperial city of South Vietnam, and then we moved to Saigon, which was lucky because we escaped having to be in Hue during the Tet Offensive, one of the worst atrocities of the Vietnam War. So I was in Saigon at the time. We were evacuated for America on April the 30th, 1975, when North Vietnam took over South Vietnam. Mm-hmm.
Nice. How would you describe your childhood and adolescence year? And what are some special holidays, traditions, memories, and experiences you recall growing up?
Okay, all right. My early childhood impression was bits and pieces of memory of Hội An. It now is a city for tourism. It's a beautiful port town, at least 1,000 years old. But I left there, although I was very proud of being born there and being associated with it via my birth. My parents were teachers of languages and literature in Hội An. That's where they met, and then they had me there. And then my fond memory of Hue, the imperial city, which was heavily damaged. The citadel and the royal palaces were damaged during the Tet Offensive. Now, if you get into or follow the Vietnam War as historical account from the U.S. standpoint, you would learn about the Tet Offensive and all of that. But my memory of Hue was before the Tet Offensive. I wasn't there during the Tet Offensive. So childhood memory was, in general, just beautiful, of the quietness and beauty of Hue and the people who were surrounding me at that time. We had the lady who was in charge of the Girl Scout in Hue, and she gave me picture and painting books and song books from France. And that was just marvelous. Of course, I lost it when we moved to Saigon. And we lived in a housing apartment complex, probably the only apartment complex built by the Catholic Church near a river in Hue. So that was just lovely.
Beautiful scene.
And then my father came back from London. He had a scholarship to leave Hue for London, and I was there with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. We got to visit, I got to visit their village, but I was just a little kid. But beautiful memory of the countryside there. In the village, I got to see the poverty of peasants in Hue. And that was a lasting impression. I still remember to this day, and how my mother taught me what that meant. the question of poverty in agricultural Vietnam, which was the very reason for the communist revolution there. All right. So, and I remember the church in Hue. I remember the temples, the Buddhist temples in Hue. So we grew up with education given by the Catholic Church. I had piano lessons. But we're Buddhists, so we got to go to temples. And from my perspective, there was never any conflict between the Catholic Church and the Buddhist Church in Vietnam. However, in politics, there was a huge conflict leading to coup d'etat and assassination, all kinds of things. But in terms of my childhood, I did develop some unpleasant experience toward the adults, but apart from that, I was trying to talk to my mother about how unhappy I was about the adults. But apart from that, Hue was beautiful. And then we moved to Saigon. That was very rough in the beginning because Saigon was just the opposite of Hue, especially with the presence of the United States, mostly felt in Saigon. So it developed into an economic city. You know, there was an aura of rich people, poor people in Saigon, much more than in Hue. Life was not as peaceful. I went to elementary school in Saigon, and I remember having to fight the boys to rescue my little brother. These were the small alleys of urban Saigon. Okay, and then the family was basically from my parents' side, my paternal grandparents. Life was much tougher, less protected than Hue. Okay. But Saigon was my teenager experience, and that was fairly good because I did very well in school. Is it still going? Okay. I did very well in school. I took an exam. The country required a national exam to go from elementary school to junior high. I mean, little kids, 10 or 11 years old, having to sit for an exam in general topics from geography to history to literature, and then an exam on math and an exam on essay writing. Well, I took it. And I passed with a very good grade. So I got admitted to one of the public schools in South Vietnam. Public schools are where you should go. The private schools are less quality. It's just the opposite of America. So then I attended secondary school all the way to the 12th grade. And then I got the highest prize in the country for my age. I got the honor prize, the presidential honor prize in literature, awarded by the president of South Vietnam. So I got that. But guess what? A month later, the communists took over, and we were evacuated to America about 3 days before the surrender of South Vietnam. And I left my maternal grandparents behind because after the Tet Offensive, which was when battles occurred in Hue, and there was a genocide, a massacre in Hue, but my maternal grandparents were saved from that. They were safe in the countryside, and then they left Hue to go to Saigon. After the Tet Offensive, many people left Hue to go to Saigon for safety from the war. So then, but at the end of the Vietnam War in April of 1975, my maternal grandparents stayed behind, and that was the biggest heartbreak. I still haven't got over that, even now, some half a century later. I still mourn when I think of that, and they eventually died in Vietnam. And so then after April, then we ended up in America. Great luck, great blessings there.
I'm so glad you were able to make it. I'm so glad you were able to make it to the U.S. You touched on your parents' occupation a little bit. Could you tell us more about their occupation after immigrating to the U.S. and what are some of the values and lessons your parents instilled in you?
Okay, all right. Well, in Vietnam, they were college and high school teachers. All right. In America, we went back to the college town where my father was a Fulbright scholar in the 70s. So naturally, we went to the place where he was before. Okay, and that is the college town of Carbondale in Illinois. And there, my mother had to go to work full-time to take care of the family because my father was in academic studies, as he couldn't find an immediate position as a professor, so he went back to school for another PhD. And he had a graduate assistantship from that, all right. But that's not enough to feed a family of four. I'm the oldest with three siblings who needed to be in school. So my mother went to work, not as a teacher, of course, but she took a factory job, packing vitamin bottles, but she was on a quota system. Like you had to pack X number of vitamin bottles to keep the job. And she was a tiny, skinny little person, a school teacher. She weighed about 36 kilograms, about less than 90 pounds, all right. But she took the assembly line job, and then I got admitted to the university, and I graduated from there with a degree in communication and journalism. My father got another PhD, and then at that time she could quit her factory job, but she became sick. My mother had to deal with personal illnesses all her life, and she eventually passed away 7 years ago, all right. But the beginning years in America were sweet, not a whole lot of hardship compared to what it could have been if we stayed behind. And life in America was much, much better than middle-class life in Vietnam. There was a difference in the standard of living. And I dropped out of college to work to help the family. So I took a job in Houston, and I was the representative for federal funding projects, assisting the refugees in Houston. I did that for 6 months, and then I decided to return to Carbondale to finish my study for my bachelor's degree. And then after that, I got employed by the Houston Independent School District, and then I decided to go to law school. So that was the beginning of my career in America. But getting back to your questions on my family and my parents, my mother made a whole lot of sacrifice for us, and I think that's typical for immigrants, especially Asian immigrants, the sacrifice that our parents had to make in our beginning days in America. I went through it. My father made a lot of sacrifice too, and we didn't know that at the time. But later, then I realized that my father also had to quit his career as a writer and publisher of books, and as a college professor in a tenured position. He ended to stay in Houston at that time to keep the family together with my mother she began to get really sick, so my father had to work. And so he ended up becoming a certified teacher for the Houston Independent School District. So no more professorship. So that was a sacrifice as well. And of course, the salary of teachers anywhere in America, I think, has got to be improving.
Yeah.
I do think that we need to pay our teachers, especially at elementary and secondary levels, much, much more money, especially in public schools too.
Okay.
But anyway, my parents made a lot of sacrifices for us, but relatively speaking, what they did was much, much better than what other immigrants had to do, including my uncles and aunts. However, the success stories were worth mentioning within my own family as well. My uncle, who was a school principal in Vietnam, of course, had to give up his administration career and his teaching career, and he became self-employed. And he went from being a janitorial supervisor, where he ended up being a supervisor over something, but in order to supervise the janitors, I take it that he had to know how to do the work, so he himself might be a janitor for a while. And then he was a swimming pool supervisor or security guard. And he was a security guard for school buildings. But while doing all of this job, he started to invest in real estate in Houston through the years of the the Depression under President Carter. There was a housing crisis, and houses in Houston just dropped so low in prices. But he took advantage of that and did his investment, which in the beginning I thought was a crazy idea, because he had to fix up like old beat up houses and having to deal with tenants from all walks of life. And I just couldn't imagine how he could have done all of that. His English was never at your level or even my level, so he kind of struggled along. But he did it, and guess what? Today, he's a millionaire.
Wow.
Yes. So that's one success story. There were others in my extended family as well. People becoming millionaires just from sheer hard work. I mean, it's hard work. It's not just good luck, because there was no good luck for immigrants with limited English. It's all with your two hands. You didn't rob the bank. You didn't become involved in criminal activities, so it's just sheer hard work.
Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, your story is also a symbol of success and hard work as an Asian American immigrant in the U.S.
Yes.
I want to ask, when you arrived in the U.S., what hopes did you hold for your new chapter in your life? And how has your perception of the U.S. has changed over the years?
Yes, okay. Back in Vietnam, growing up, especially during my teenage days where I started to have a lot of activities, including learning at the, quote, Vietnamese American Association. That was like Centre Alliance Française for the French. You know, each city has an alliance association for the French, okay? So for America, it's the Vietnamese American Association. And so I did a lot of activities there. My concept was great country, superpower, so much to learn from, so much to welcome in developing countries. Great image, never any image of what the communist bloc had made America out to be, like the imperialists, the exploiters of labor all around the world. No, I never got that impression. And I knew very early in life that that was just propaganda. Okay, I didn't have any contact with Americans except through maybe a couple of classes at the Vietnamese American Association, mostly taught by Vietnamese who spoke fluent English. Occasionally, I had an American, just maybe for 1 or 2 sessions. I attended maybe 1 or 2 Christmas get-togethers at various offices that belong to America, mainly the embassy, the defense attache's office where my aunt worked. Very few contacts with America except for American TV during the war. After Americans withdrew their troops from Vietnam, there was no more American TV. But I literally grew up with American TV. Well, all of the great shows like Bewitched. I don't know if you have no idea what it was about. Just wonderful sitcoms, So grew up with that, and I actually learned American English from watching American TV in Vietnam. There was another show called Combat. It's about World War II. Soldiers, American soldiers. You have no idea what that is, okay? But these were wonderful American TV in black and white at that time. After the fall of Vietnam, I think it's a mixed perception about America that I begin to learn that because of realpolitik, I mean the interests of the nation, what policymakers decided for their interest, for their nation, is not the ideals for internationalism anymore, but it's the self-interest of the people who act for the nation. They're going to do what is best for their interests. So I was starting to have that perception, which was discussed in the academic studies at the college level and graduate schools level in America. So it's subject to criticism by scholars and students of political science. Okay, but I started to change my naive, idealistic perception about America based on what I saw and studied and experienced. But overall, I still look at America as the opinion leader, that the opinions held by America and Americans can still be setting the examples for the rest of the world, that the rest of the world still look up to America in so many ways, despite what has happened in politics and history. The failure, if we may call that, of American involvement in Vietnam is one place where some paranoia and skepticism might have been raised about the role of America as a superpower or in world politics. But still, there is a belief in America that I hold on to, the pride about being a citizen of the United States, the good luck that we have had in being able to be part of the evacuation, which was really America's keeping up its promise to its employees and the allies during the Vietnam War. The promise was fulfilled, not for everybody, but at least for us, the lucky ones, at the end of the Vietnam War. And I saw the efforts of what America went through to take care of us during our first days in America at the refugee camps and out of the refugee camps. But even with the help from the country and the administration in terms of refugee resettlement, still I will say that at the end of the day, the immigrants make their own fate. That is our hard work that brought about what our lives are today in America. With a little help in the beginning, with an organized program for resettlement and evacuation. After that, being in America means you learn to be independent, to take care of yourselves, and then to make a contribution to greater causes and to help others, because others have helped us in the past. I really believe in that. And our story is an example of that.
You have a great story, and thank you for the answer. I want to ask, going to your career journey, I want to ask, what does the law mean to you? And could you describe your career in law?
My career, okay, all right. Now, to add to my previous sentence about the image of America, the story of my career is also an example of what I consider to be a work in progress in America. Today, it's been much, much better and less talked about. But still, the question of race and gender relations in America, I think, is a work in progress. Just because today things have changed, my career is one example. Both the pros and the cons, and I will tell you for purposes of this interview, my life story or my career is the very example of race and gender relations in America, that progress has been made since the days of Martin Luther King, but still it is a work in progress, and we should never take it for granted. We have to be mindful that it is always there, because the question of prejudice is kind of inhuman in the human mind and body. So we need to be aware of it. We need to continue making sure that the goals are the reality, and that we are for equality in race and gender. And America should set the standard and the lesson of progress, and not to be behind in that. So back to my career. I graduated from college with a degree in journalism and communication, and I graduated summa cum laude, which to me, it was just something that I had to do because it's meant to be. It's not something that that I should even talk about. It's what I expected of myself. And to me, it's not all that difficult. If you study, you will get something. I mean, most likely we get B's instead of A's because we enjoyed watching TV or something besides studying. If you really want the A's, you put your effort into it, you will get the A's. You know, sometimes you pick a course that you dislike so much, and then no matter what you do, you try, it's not going to happen, so you drop it because there's freedom of choice in America. Okay, so my academic records to me are just something that should happen regardless, you know. I was the top student in Vietnam, so naturally I should be the top student in my classes in America. That's the least I would expect of myself, you know. Nobody had to push me. Okay, so I did well in school, and then while in college I got my first full-time job as the representative of immigrants in Houston. I went to Houston for 6 months, got this job, did it for 6 months, then quit to go back to school. So I enjoyed that job, but to me it was an easy job because how much did one have to try to help people who were just like you? It's very easy. Whatever I went through, they're going through it now. So naturally, I had to help them. And then I got paid. I mean, it's not that. It was a big salary to me at that time, since in school I was working at minimum wage to be a student writer for the campus newspaper. And I worked and worked and worked, and I got paid the minimum to do my work as a reporter because I was learning my career. So, all right, but so I got paid much more in the Houston job for 6 months, and that helped me help my family, since my father, my mother was working in a factory during our first 3 years in America. Anyway, so, and then after that, I got recruited to work for a public relations firm because of my journalism and communication degree. I got that job. It's easy. I went to the interview. They offered me the job right away. But come to think of it, if you had a school record in journalism, the field that they needed for their communications firm, they specialize in media programs for businesses. They found a college graduate with a straight A transcript and no problem in communication or the English language. Of course they would hire you right away. So in the beginning of my career, there was no issue of race or gender prejudice at all. They got a good deal. Why shouldn't they hire a minority woman if they had a good deal? So got that job. I worked there, and promotions, of course. And one of the account executives offered me a job in New York City, which was the top tier for communication and journalism students to be in New York City. I had no idea what it meant to be in the Big Apple. To me, it's just a job that required me to move, and I didn't want to move. I wanted to be here with my siblings and my parents. So why should I move? So I turned it down. And at work, people just looked stunned, and I didn't even understand why they got stunned. It's natural for me to want to stay in Houston with my parents, but it was the wrong career move. All right. So I stayed here, and while I was working in communication in Houston, having turned down the opportunity to be in the Big Apple, I got recruited by the Houston Independent School District, and that was my first executive job. They interviewed me, and they saw that I had something to offer, so they made up a job to hire me to fit my background, because an administrative or executive position in the Houston Independent School District, which is an educational institution, really didn't need to hire a communications major. So, but they saw something. So the school executive at the administration building here in Houston, the building is now gone. It was a beautiful building. So actually, I have become the witness of the development of our city, Houston. Beautiful administration building for the Houston Independent School District. They made up a position, and the pay was higher because I was underpaid at the public relations firm, that I didn't even know that I was underpaid. I thought I was just lucky to have a job that paid that much. My salary was $10,000 a year. So it was big at that time compared to my mother's salary working in a factory environment at major manufacturing corporations still. But once I started working, then my mother didn't have to work, all right. But then she got sick with cancer.
Sorry.
So then and at that time, I had decided that I would go to law school. Why did I decide to go to law school? I thought about a legal career in Vietnam because I was good at public speaking. In Vietnamese high school, I was voted to become the contestant for a rhetorics competition in English, which meant that you had to give a speech in English. So I got voted by the school to be the representative for that competition. Of course, it never took place because the communists came over and took the country. It's all one country now, North and South was gone. Okay, it's now one country under communism, and it has diplomatic relations with the United States. But getting back to my career, so I left the less paying job to go to work for the Houston Independent School District. Then I decided to go to law school, but that meant I had to go to law school at night. So I combined law school at night and the executive job at the Houston Independent School District while my mother was diagnosed with cancer. So it's the nursing for my mother, which was unfortunately kept to a minimum, my mother ended up taking care of herself, really, with 2 years of chemotherapy. If you ask me today, who are the heroines in my life, I would say my 2 grandmothers and my mother. I put them above my father and my 2 grandfathers, because without the women and the woman and her sacrifices, the man, even in the family system, couldn't get very far. All right, so all of them made sacrifices for me and all of us, my siblings and all that. But I would say my heroes in my life were my mother, my 2 grandmothers, and my aunt, who really was the person who caused us to be evacuated by the United States at the communist takeover. Right at the time of the communist takeover. Yes. My aunt was an employee of the Defense Attaché's office under the U.S. government, part of the embassy in Vietnam at the fall of Saigon. Okay, so then I decided to go to law school, and that was law school, and my mother nursing herself under chemotherapy with me as the primary responsible person. I took her to her chemo sessions and all of that, plus the full-time job for the independent school district. But the job was under control because I've proved myself with the administration, and they knew that I was in law school at night. They kind of admired that because, law school at night and going to school. So they supported me in going to law school. But naturally, after I graduated from law school, then I quit the Houston Independent School District. I could have stayed with it for a career with the law school, but I decided not to, in order to really experience being a lawyer. Okay, so then I took my first law job when I graduated, and that was the judicial clerkship for the federal court, which was like the extension of law school to build up your credentials and experience in litigation with the federal court. From the federal clerkship, I joined the top law firm based in Washington, D.C. Then after that, a series of law firms, all top ranked in the United States. And I can tell you that it was not going to the zoo or going to the theater working for these law firms. I mean, they really worked you. Yes. The other alternative was to do what many Asian American lawyers have done, and that it was to go starting a law firm and make money serving your people. Many people have done that, including our former city council member, Mr. Gordon Kwan, who was also an interviewee here. Okay, but I didn't choose that route. I chose to work for the big firms in America, and I finished with 4 of them consecutively. That made up my career, and then I went to work for Mobil Oil. They sent me back to Vietnam to negotiate the first petroleum exploration contract with the new socialist government in Vietnam. So that was my homecoming as a lawyer after 20 years of absence, where I was and have since been a citizen of the United States. Okay, so that's the summary. And then after I did all of that, the law practitioner for big firms and corporations, I then quit it all with the intention to write, but I took a law professorship to do that. But misfortune struck again with my mother having survived her cancer. She recovered, had a fairly good life for years, for decades, but then she became ill again, and I quit it all. I resigned from the law professorship to be back in Houston. The main job then was to fill in the blank and be the caregiver for my parents, which I did until their passing. Of course, my siblings were supposed to help me, and they did, but sometimes they took the wrong approach. So I still had to bear the emotional burden and to fill in the blank in terms of parental caregiving. You know, to look for help in senior care is very difficult. I think that is really the challenge for communities, especially for us Asian Americans, where our moral values, our ties to our family are different from the mainstream model for other Americans. For Asian Americans, there's a special meaning, special norm, special value attached to caring for the old.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. As Asian Americans, we expect our children to care for our parents. But I want to touch on your inspiration to pursue law. Where did it start? Were there any specific childhood memories, adolescence experiences, mentors, friendships, or realizations that prompted you to pursue this field? How has your identity influenced this choice?
Oh, tremendously, consciously and unconsciously. If you interview a second generation Asian American that has never spent any time within the culture, maybe you will get a different picture. But for me, my identity has been built as a Vietnamese living in Vietnam and part of the evacuation. So I've seen both sides of the ocean. So my experience may be a little bit different from those who haven't had that much connection to the homeland and the family system as it was on the other side of the ocean. But I was so, and I still am, so emotionally attached to my grandparents. Like I live with their memory. And I'm still mourning in a way that each time that the opportunities arise for me to think about my grandparents, I live it all over again. It's never a question of, oh, I've forgotten because it's too long ago. There's certain things like my grandmother's death, my grandfather's death in Vietnam, the stories that were told to me about what happened in North Vietnam, which I believe for Chinese Americans would be similar to what went on in China before 1949, you know. So parents or grandparents in mainland China, I think there are similarities there. But so the question of identity is very important to me, and I live it. It's not something that I consciously had to do. I didn't really have any choice. I am me, and I embrace myself. I'm proud of myself, and so the identity is naturally there in my approach toward my career or my life. And I took a setback because of that, but I don't regret, because you can't be anything other than being yourself. You know, you have to embrace yourself and accept it and draw your strength from it. And even if you lose something in the process, I could have made much more money, I could have accepted a different lines of work, but that should not be items for regret, because you can't stop being yourself. So it's not a question of the right or wrong decisions. It is in looking back, but in general, it is the question of being yourself. So when you have to be yourself, then you don't regret, and you don't look back and say, oh, I should not have done that, because it's like if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't be myself, you know. So to me, it's just natural. And I accept the consequence. If that means that today I didn't get to do ABC, I didn't have as much money or prestige or fame, fine, you know, I get myself, you know, so we move forward. And to me, going forward means I focus on my writing, because that's what I've loved to do all my life.
I also want to touch on your inspiration for law. What inspired you to pursue law?
Who are my role models, or
what inspired you to pursue law? Were there any friends, any family members that made you motivated to pursue a law career?
Oh, the law career?
Yes.
Okay. I chose law because at that time it seemed to be the challenge. You know, not many Asian Americans, especially women, went into law at that time. There was the practical consideration that I might be unique if I was in a profession with so few of us, you know. It turned out to be true, but it was an overkill. It didn't matter whether you were the first or not, you know, really. It's just being yourself, you know. Nobody would do you a favor and hire you if you're incompetent. If you are the first or not, it didn't matter. You had to convince them that you are competent and live up to that representation. And the only way to do that is through hard work and applying your brain, you know, just put your brain into the job. All right. So the inspiration comes from being myself and what I have gone through, the values that I carry with me from being myself. So really, you become your own inspiration, because being the first also means that you don't know where to get it.
Exactly,
you know? So you get it from yourself, all right. But I would say that all of the people that I've worked with at various places who recognize my contribution and give me the promotion, they become the inspiration when they give me the promotion, because if people don't believe in you, they're not going to give you the promotion. Nobody does you any favor, and you don't have to do anything to get it except your own willingness to work hard and your ability to make a contribution, which is proven by the time they give you the promotion or decided to hire you. All right. The inspiration is needed when you do something extra on your own, for example, my personal commitment to a literary career, that I have to get from somewhere, and I got it from people that I don't know. In terms of writing, I got it from two writers whom I don't know at all. It's Amy Tan and Maxine Hong Kingston, because they were the first to make a name for Asian American writers. They are both of Chinese descent. So I didn't know them at all, but because they made it, they became my inspiration. You know, so that's one example of where the inspiration came from.
I want to ask, you've worked for so many years in law and policy making. What are some lessons you have learned? What are some principles that guide your work and career? And what has been the most rewarding aspect of your career?
What is the most rewarding
Yes.
aspect? The most rewarding aspect has been the job offers and the promotions, because it's so concrete.
Yes.
You know, that
certainly.
it came. The problem is in turning it down
Yeah.
and not pursuing it by turning it down. But again, it goes back to the question of not being so harsh on yourself in terms of the decisions you make, because when you make that decision, whether it's right or wrong, for your own sake, you're being yourself. You know, I don't realize the importance of the dollars, you know, but that's because I was myself. You know, I was born into and raised to be a person who put values that are not mercenary at the top of the list.
Yes.
And so I reject money in order to pursue something. It could be just the bubble somewhere, but it's what I believed in at that time. And so, as I said, by being myself, I made the wrong decision. So you didn't blame yourself for just being yourself, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the disadvantage of being the first, because you don't make the wise decision for yourself by being yourself,
Yeah.
since you didn't have the benefit of experience or mentorship. But looking back, I would have invested more in mentorship. And really, my advice to younger folks is that you really have to spend the time on developing mentorship, in that you try to keep up with the people whom you knew through various walks of time, and really try, you know, just make a point each day. You call 2 people, or you write 2 people to keep up with them during the years. That's your network of mentorship. I didn't do that. So I lost contacts with people. And there's a price that you have to pay for that, and that is you have your own self as your mentor, because you haven't kept up with your mentor throughout the years. But the reward has been the promotion and the job offers that I got. Those were the concrete rewards of how you've done well in your career, and especially in the law. Yeah.
Nice. Very good advice.
Oh, and I became the first judge in America
Impressive.
for Vietnamese. So
Wow.
that came. I didn't even really have to struggle or fight for that. It came so naturally.
Yeah.
And I accepted it, but that meant a lot of work, though, since I was practicing law in the Ninth Circuit, which was the federal court in California. I still did that, and then I got a statutory exemption to sit as a judge in Texas, because it's the state court system, the municipal court system, while I was practicing in a different jurisdiction, a different circuit in California. So the state legislature in Texas gave an exemption for lawyers to do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Since you touched upon your judgeship, I want to ask, as a trailblazing woman of Asian diaspora and woman of color, how do you see the value of your work in the community? What does this journey of law mean to you personally, and for the Asian diasporic community. Yes.
The role model aspect, I could have done more by keeping up with people. Because I'm sure that a lot of people wanted to look me up just for talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't do enough of that because I ran out of time. But I did a whole lot of community service. I mean, I responded to every single invitation to speak to students and community groups. There was nothing that I turned down. And I still didn't think that I did enough because there were students from those speaking engagements, there were students who sought me out on an individual basis.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not follow up with them. And that was, if there was a regret, that's the regret, that I should really have been of help to the young women who sought me out. And I didn't do that. Like, for example, one of them took me to the airport after a speaking engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And in the car, and she was an officer of the student association in order to have the contact with the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And she started talking to me on a personal basis. And I should have stayed in touch with her and responding to her in these personal matters because that was my personal responsibility. But I didn't do that because I was so busy. And those are examples of the regrets that I have today. That's the only regret, that I should have paid more attention to the individuals who sought me out. There was another woman in Houston who looked me up and sought me out. Two women, as a matter of fact. The first one to get advice for her daughters for a law career, and I didn't follow up with her. I responded, but I could have done more, you know. And the second woman, her child, her son was killed by the skinhead. Race discrimination. A medical student was killed by the skinhead. This was like in the 90s. And she looked me up, and I did not respond to her because at that time I was a judge, and I told her that as a judge I could not comment on individual cases, and I couldn't be of help to her because of my judgeship. I could not get involved in private matters.
Yes.
In looking back, I regretted that tremendously. I felt that I had let my people down. Where I was needed the most was on this individual basis, person to person. And they looked me up, and I did not respond because of these reasons. For example, for the skinhead issue, the murder, I was a judge and I couldn't get involved. But I could have been involved as Wendy Duong to give her the comfort. She lost her son, a medical student, getting killed by the skinhead.
Oh.
You know, I could have just said, no, you're calling me, you're calling Wendy Duong, I'm here to comfort you. I could have done that instead of having this judgeship hat over me to tell her that I can't comment or can't help you with the private matter. You see, so those are the little incidents. I mean, they're little, but they're not little. Those are the few incidents where I truly regret. And now with my writing, if there are opportunities like that, again, this time I react to the individual. I have to, you know, so.
I mean, those moments are tough, but you still have shown that you are so committed to help the community in any way you can.
Oh, yes. All my life, I've committed to helping people for individual matters, not just for the name or institutionally.
Yes.
You know, I have been doing that in the pro bono cases that I worked on, which I didn't advertise or talk about to Vietnamese Americans. Most of them don't know, but I did, and that's a matter of public record because of the litigation.
Yes.
I mean, the last pro bono case that I did was decades ago. I haven't been able to when I don't practice law, then I'm out of touch with legal matters. So I haven't done any pro bono matters. Well, in fact, the last one without litigation that was done in the 2020, so that was kind of quite recent. I had to help them because if not, then they would have gone to a lawyer, and that lawyer would take 1/3 of their recovery. So I said, okay, I help you, you know. And it is difficult because if it hadn't been difficult, then the lawyers out there would have taken the case. You see, it's difficult, but I got them something. I mean, it was a surprise because I almost gave up. I thought, you know, they're not going to pay, and you have to sue them. If somebody doesn't pay to settle the case, you have to sue them. And then those clients are too poor to sue, and it needs a lawyer who will take a contingency fee. But, you know, at the last minute, I kept trying, and finally I got them something. So that was my last pro bono person.
That is very admirable.
Yeah.
I want to ask, what legacy do you want to leave in the legal and academic communities?
I'm glad you asked because that is going on right now in my life. And I would like to keep a copy of the tape if Bryce would give it to me.
Yeah.
Okay, because right now I am doing what I hope to be my legacy. I'm starting a series called Vietnamese America, Voices Forgotten.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm gathering all of the voices and the stories that nobody wants to listen to anymore because of the timing factor. For example, boat people from Vietnam, that shocked the conscience of the world. In the 1980s, the 1990s, up to the 2000 with refugee camps in Asia, all right. But nowadays, it's old news, so nobody wants to be reminded of the time when they were miserable at the refugee camps or didn't have a dime and didn't get to go to America, you know, but it's part of history. So I'm compiling this series called Vietnamese America, Voices Forgotten, where I tell the stories of Vietnamese in poetry, and it's my poetry. I've been reading so much of my own poetry that this interview is a nice break. I mean, I stayed up all night, every night, because I had to negotiate and coordinate just a bunch of administrative tasks for my book to be published, because my publisher is like a small independent press, and the owners are typically running around with thousands of tasks on their own. So the author has to step in because it's her book. And so I've been doing all kinds of things while reading my poetry. I am so sick of my poetry. You know, I mean, I've never had to read my own poetry so much in my entire life. With poetry, you make it and you put it aside. You know, you don't want to like go read your poetry over and over again. I've been doing it for 2 years now. And one problem after another. I have people who disappeared on me after taking my publisher's money. I have publishers who dissolved the company because they don't like it anymore. You know, it's a breach of contract. I've had to deal with all of that. And now the first book is going to be out hopefully in another 10 days. And that's my legacy. It's the whole history of the 50 years of life of Vietnamese Americans, what they have had to go through in terms of historical events. And I'm doing this chronology by way of poetry, and then the poetry book is embellished with my paintings. And I taught myself to paint, and I even improvised my own material and method. Like I don't do oil for this because it takes too long to dry,
Yeah.
and I don't have a studio. So I developed my own method of creating my paintings for the book.
Wow.
You know, so it's all like me and my poetry, and it's a series of 5 books. So now the first book, after 2 years, we went from 65 poems to 45, down to 36, down to 18, and now it's down to 9, but it's still, I hope, a good book. So I send you the ebook version as an attachment or an exhibit to my interview. And actually, I meant to take advantage of the interview to tell you about this series of poetry painting books called Art Book.
Mm-hmm.
It's bilingual. The poems will be in English and Vietnamese. I composed them simultaneously because I'm not a translator. I don't like translation, and I don't translate my own poetry. To me, it's impossible. It's either you compose it in English and then you set it aside, you know what you want to say, and you compose in Vietnamese. But to have to sit there and translate, it doesn't, it has no appeal to me, and I'm not a translator. I don't even like it. I mean, I listen to the translators or interpreters at the UN, and I think to myself, this is exhausting. I'd rather speak English, or I forget about English and I go to a group of Vietnamese that I speak Vietnamese. But to go back and forth, like what the interpreters do at the UN, I thought that was just, it's not something that I'm inspired to do.
I look forward, your publishing initiatives seem really interesting and exciting, and I look forward to reading your book.
Yes.
I do agree that sometimes there are things that get lost in interpretations, because you can't just translate something thoroughly to the other language.
Yes.
You mentioned your books. I actually searched some of your other books, like Daughters of the River Huang.
Yes.
Your poems that have won international book awards.
Yes.
I want to ask, what do you hope to achieve through your creative writing? How has your reading been able to address the lack of representation of Vietnamese voices in authorship?
Yes, there have been many authors who are Vietnamese American, but I don't think we have had somebody with footing in 2 cultures simultaneously, or the life experience that I've had. So it's either the person was born and raised in America, looking at the other side through their parents, or somebody from Vietnam whose work is translated for an American public. I'm in between 2 worlds, and I can pull both worlds together in the historical and political context. So I think my position is unique, and I hope to bring that forward to diversify and enrich the literary scene, and I think there is a place for me. What I've done in the past is to, quote, degrade my literary career down to the least priority because of the ethical commitment to the law. You can't be a lawyer and do only half of the job. You can practice part-time, which is unlikely for lawyers working for big firms and corporations like myself. Okay, you can't represent ExxonMobil and say, oh, I'm only doing it part-time. Sorry, don't give me any more. No, you can't. So it's always that my literary career, or that part of me, has to be suppressed and put second place compared to the law career. And it has nothing to do with what I desire, So now is the time, with my retirement, now is the time to put the literary career first and do it with a sense of mission, a sense of community. Voices forgotten after 50 years. Some voices are forgotten, but they need to be heard. And they need to have their place in the historical landscape. Now, the same thing must have happened with Chinese Americans or Korean Americans, and I haven't done any research into that to find out. So sometime, if you know, we can have a conversation, and I would love to learn, what happens to the Chinese or the Koreans who kind of transcend both cultures and both coasts, the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast. What happened to them? Are they represented in literature? No. There have been so many books written by Chinese Americans, Chinese English, Chinese Europeans, and I've read some of them, but the overall complete picture I don't have yet, and I would like to find out. Yes.
Awesome. How do you identify yourself ethnically?
How do I identify myself at this point? A lawyer by my license, but a writer by commitment.
Oh, nice.
That's what my job is going to be, totally unpaid from this point. I pay myself. So
Yeah.
I pay myself, meaning I don't give myself a paycheck. I just eat less in order to write more. Right. So from this point on, my career is literature, poetry, and novels, and nonfiction. I mean, I will write until I drop dead. And the worst thing is to become stricken with dementia and Alzheimer's. If that happens, then it's God's will. I don't know what to do, but I hope it's not going to happen because I take care of my brain.
Yes.
I exercise it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't happen either.
Yeah.
Where and when do you feel most at home?
With memory of my late parents and grandparents.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yes. And with interacting with people like yourself.
Oh, I'm so honored.
Younger people whose lives seem to embrace a purpose. I really enjoy that kind of contact, and I feel at home with it. If they find me, then I feel at home with them. I just haven't had the time to make the effort to go out and help them, because how in the world can I do that now? I mean, I should go to meetings or attend their events. For example, the New Year's celebration, that's one way, but in crowds like that, people don't strike up personal interaction. So I have to wait for them to find me, as in your case.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I also want to ask you, how do you relate to French culture?
How do I
relate to French culture?
Oh, the French culture?
Yes.
It has been part of me too, but I didn't invest enough of my time in it. Again, it's just a question of priorities and availability, but I am at home with the French culture. I've lost the language a lot. I can read still, but speaking, I don't think that I'm like a native speaker. And I've stopped composing in French altogether. I mean, I'm focusing on my English now, writing in English. I don't write in Vietnamese anymore. I've done enough of that. Now, if I do it, it's out of necessity, like for communication, but not for creative writing.
Awesome. Given your immigration background and your phenomenal record of achievements as a law professor, most downloaded scholar on the Social Scientists Research Network, attorney, a judge, founder of the National Asia Pacific American Bar Association, and as the first Vietnamese American judge in the country, what are you most proud of?
I am proud of my pro bono service. And in that sense, again, I regret not responding to the individuals who have sought me out for comfort, all right? I am proud of my pro bono, although that is the least known.
Yes. And why?
But that's what I'm proud of. And I'm proud of my writing, although much of it has not been published. I never had a literary agent. I'm going to focus on that now. With the poetry series is taken care of because I have a publisher. It's a unique project in itself, all right. But after that, I'm going to go back to the norm, and that is to look for a literary agent while I continue writing, and to find a major mainstream publisher. And it may happen, it may not. The work is done. That's the most important thing. And we'll manage. I will manage with the marketplace as it is and the rest of my time before I turn too old. So,
could you also explain?
And what I'm most proud of is the ability to maintain the artist in me while being a lawyer as a career, and the other types of activities that have constituted a career in addition to just being a straightforward lawyer. You know, being a judge can be a career in itself.
Yes.
Now that I do regret, because I closed doors that I should have pursued, like to really become a judge on the federal bench. I was inspired to do that at one time and then decided not to do it because of the commitment to literature. Not enough time.
I see that you like pursuing literature more than law. Can I ask what's the reason behind?
What is what?
What is the reason behind your strong connection with literature?
Oh,
than law?
my parents.
Your
My
parents?
parents. They are both were professors of literature,
Oh.
and they put it in me as the earliest interest in life. You know, I started making poems when I was maybe 5 or 6. I just came up with poetry in Vietnamese with rhymes and the exact
Wow.
number of words. You know, I just did it because there's a natural musicality to it that the child just picked up. So I blurted poetry, Vietnamese poetry, out before I started grade school by listening to adults. My mother and my father were both literature fans. I mean, it was their careers in their blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they wholeheartedly embraced my literature work. My father was the one who put the manuscript together in Vietnamese. My first published book was in Vietnamese,
Wow.
and that was the work of my father. I just wrote, you know, some in handwriting, some on manual typewriters, some on computers, and I just sent all of those to him to read, never thinking that it would be published. And he retyped, he put in the accent marks by hand. Now it's all computerized, but back then it's by hand. He did all of that. He found a publisher who's Vietnamese, and that was my first book. And when he told me, I said, oh, okay. I didn't think much of it. I thought it was like his pastime.
Yeah.
Like he didn't have anything else to do, so he did this. But no, he took it so seriously and so proud of it too.
I'm glad you had such amazing inspirations in your life to pursue literature. What is one life lesson you learned that you would like to share with our audience?
One life lesson that I would like to share with the world, right?
Yes.
And it can be personal or career, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me see. It would be what I would put in my memoir. My relationship with my parents and my grandparents. That's what I would want to share with the world because it's unique and I think it's of help to immigrants wherever you're from. You know, the person would also have the feeling of standing in that space between two worlds. And the old worlds mean your grandparents and your parents, whether they are in America or they stuck in another continent.
Mm-hmm.
They're still part of you if you're in that space between two worlds. Now, if you're born in America and you've never known anything about your grandparents and you have to go back to like China or Korea or Africa or somewhere to try to find out a little bit about your grandparents, then that might be different. But for me, I know both worlds. And that's what I would like to share with the world. Because it's the lesson, the experience of humanity. And you should share something that has meaning to humanity as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So you certainly don't want to share, you know, things that are too personal, like how you lost your shoe or how you eat your first jelly, you know, whatever. Those might have meanings.
Yeah.
But unless they add something to humanity, they remain in your drawer, like your own experience that you don't want to share. Sometimes you simply don't want to share. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good one. What are some differences you see in the younger generation of Asian Americans since you have been in the U.S.?
My experience as an Asian American in
yes.
the U.S.?
Yes. What, comparing yourself to other Asian Americans who are in the U.S.
Race and gender relations.
Oh.
Race and gender relations. I've experienced discrimination, but I didn't realize it at the time because I didn't have anything to compare to.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But that's what I would like to share with Asian Americans to prepare them. Things might have changed, but it may happen again to another human being. To give you an example, I got hired by a firm, and I'm not going to mention names here. I got hired by the firm, and they treated me well, and they worked me a lot, of course, you know.
Yeah.
And I never knew that the person who reported to me got paid twice my salary. I got a salary, and it was a good salary, so I was contented. Again, I was taught not to be mercenary. It is a cultural thing, and I think that needs to be changed because as an American, you have to think of financial impact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's something called the Equal Pays Act on the book, and it's been on the book for a long time. So I want to tell Asian Americans that if you put your effort into finding out whether you are discriminated against, and if you have the concrete proof, then take some actions. Don't do what I did. I was an idealist. I didn't think about money. They offered me a salary that's good enough. I found out from the person who reported to me on the project that they actually paid him twice my salary. The difference is that much.
Wow.
But because of the work, he had to report to me. Because of the work. So he reported to me, and then he he took me aside and he said, by the way, I just happen to know this and I wanted you to know that I actually make this much money. And I heard the figure and I said, oh my God, that's twice my salary.
Wow.
It's an outright violation of the Equal Pay Act. How did that happen? Because they could get away with it. The administration could get away with it. When they hired me, they looked at my salary record and they made an offer by a number, thinking if I accept it, then that's it. And when they hired him, they looked at his salary record or what he demanded, and if they wanted him, they had to meet his pride. Now he reported to me. That didn't make him, that didn't make them realize that they violated the law, or maybe they did know that they violated the law.
Yeah. Those experiences are a little saddening to hear. I want to ask one more question about your about the current legal system, especially the one that are especially in regarding to immigration law. Since America is being very strict on immigration,
yes.
How do you think the U.S. will attract talented people like yours in the future, and how will that impact their contributions to the United States?
Well, the views expressed by restricting immigration is that in the present situation, the U.S. is not getting the talents. They're getting the criminals, the bad segments of society. That is the justification or the impetus toward restricting the borders right now.
Yes.
So most people in that camp of the view will take issue with your statement that America will lose the talent by restricting this categorized segment of the world's society, that America is opening its borders for criminals and the bad segments that you don't want in America. They have to prove that, and they are going to have to lean on that kind of argument in order to meet your argument that, look, if you close the border that way, you're losing talents, the attraction of talents, which has been the meaning of the Statue of Liberty and America standing for the development of talents. You know, freedom would nurture talents and creativity, and we're getting the best of the world under our belt. So those are two contradicting views of describing a reality. And then there's a question of proving the reality that you're proposing by numbers. And I am proud of the fact that I stand for the proposition that talents are coming in.
Mm-hmm.
But from that camp, they're going to say, but that's not the reality anymore. You know, so it's a give and take, and it's a question of generalizing what you're facing. You know, you have to generalize that this group consists of criminals and this group consists of talents, you see. But the question of talents is provable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are you going to close the border to like Nobel Prize in Science on purpose? Of course not. But if there is, and some people find out, that's going to make headlines, you know, for changing the policy of America, you see. But we don't know whether we're going to face with those cases or not. So we're dealing with generalization to advance a policy based on politics.
How do you think that will impact the immigrants' contribution to the community?
How have I impacted, or
how these policies will impact the future immigrants' contribution to the United States, or the current immigrants?
they will deter people from trying to enter America illegally if they know that once they get in, they are going to be deported and turned back. I myself, in my career, had defended aliens in deportation proceedings based on grounds that have nothing to do with the issue of the borders. These are people who are in America and they are deported. They are in America legally, and they are deported because they did something bad in America, and I defended them on clemency ground, which is spelled out in the Immigration Act. There was language of the law to make an exception to deportation based on clemency or the impact on the family. Okay, there was a bad element, but it's causing hardship to the family to take this man away from his family and deport him. So those are the cases that I've done free of charge as part of my pro bono work. Okay, so to answer your question, of course, if we're closing the border, we are going to impact those who want to be in America and make the efforts to make it happen. You see, and among those, there may be some huge talents that potentially could be of so much help to America. Of course, there is going to be that negative impact, but it turns on how you generalize the people who are standing outside the border wanting to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's going to deter people from trying to cross the border illegally, you know. And I think this administration is trying to say that we're not dealing with people who are legally admitted to America, like a Nobel potential applying to be in America. We're only dealing with unknown people who are crossing the border illegally. That's the argument right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have had experience with the law. If there was something you would change about the U.S. legal system, what would it be?
U.S. laws in general?
Yes.
Oh my God, that's very huge. I would change a lot of things because many things are not working the way they should. So I would change many things, but I have to think about this as to what would be on my agenda as a critical question or matter. I would do something to change the crowdedness of our courts dockets. Mm-hmm. Because that's doable.
Yes.
You know, that's doable. I think the system of appointing judges, that can be improved. Mm-hmm. I think judges should be kept away from politics, that there should be appointments that are not dependent on what's going on with elections or who's the person to make the appointments. There should be an ongoing method of appointing judges based on talents, but not on politics. And I would do away with the system that judges have to run for office and pay for campaigns. That is what I'm going to change. That all judges should be appointed and no judge will have to run for office. Because when you run for office, sometimes it's a question of who runs the better election campaign with the most money, and judges have to go around collecting contributions. I don't think judges should do that. You know, so that's why I've never run for judgeship, and I never will. You know, if I have money, I will give it to the poor. I'm not going to spend it on an effort to elect myself. You know, I don't want to be a judge based on money. No, I would turn it down. Mm-hmm. So that's the number one. I mean, in America, there are judges who do not select their judges based on election. I think Colorado is one of those, based on my memory. What the status of the law is now, I don't know. But that's one thing that I would like to change if I have the power. I mean, really take care of our judicial system.
That's a really good point, and
Yeah.
I do agree with that. I want to go back to your first point about becoming a lawyer. You mentioned that law was one of the fields that were that lacked representation of Asian Americans. You recently had auditioned for the debut for the musical Miss Saigon in New York City
Yeah.
and Los Angeles.
That was a long time ago. That was in the 1990s and late 1980s.
Oh wow, nice. And you successfully organized a diversity concert
Yes.
featuring classical, Broadway, and Vietnamese music
Yes.
in Denver. How do you think you can motivate younger generation of Asian Americans to pursue a career in other industries like entertainment that lacks
Yes,
the representation of Asian Americans?
That has happened much more than my time. It has happened a lot. So for anyone who wants a career in Hollywood or Broadway or the performing arts, there are more opportunities now, but there might be just the adverse reaction, and that is we have enough of them now, so we're not going to need any more, So I think what should happen is that we should take care of ourselves. We do our own films. We write our own novels. And the way to do that is to become a director and a producer. Our communities are rich enough now because of the years we spent in America. So we get our own money, do our own shows. Then we can have actors and singers and writers and all kinds of contribution on our own.
Yeah.
So in a way we audition for ourselves. And that is happening with my series. I kind of went out for bid and I said, I have this work and I want a publisher's Vietnamese owned. I haven't tried Asian Americans yet because that's bigger.
Yeah.
It requires more work on myself and I may have to do that. So I did the Vietnamese first. I went out for bid and I said, we need a publisher to publish books like mine and others. Who wants to do it? Please contact me. And I got responses. But there were problems there too, and it has to do with personalities and just the sense of unity. If it's done for the right person, it will be successful regardless. And I hope that my series of publication will prove that we could do it. Because individuals and nonprofits and talent get together and said, if that's what we need, and if that's what your need, we'll do it. And the money is coming in as donations, just little tiny bit at a time. And I don't even have to go around doing the fundraising myself, I just need to go out for bid. And I did, but there wasn't an official bid. It's just like words of mouth. And now I have the publisher to bring at least one book out, but there are 4 more. So we'll see. So to answer your question, it's time that we create our own opportunity. What about the Vietnamese get the permission from Les Mis or Miss Saigon and say, it's going to be an all Asian cast now? Everybody, and when the character is non-Asian, will audition and fill in the blank. You see, I think now is the time. So that would be what I propose to community groups. And then, but some of that is happening already at the Asian Society.
Yes.
They have exhibitions of artists, filmmakers, so some of that is already happening, but what we don't want is that the Asian Society will focus on only one group and not the whole landscape of Asian Americans, but we just do it with one group, like the Korean dance troupes or the Chinese American filmmakers. We have to kind of really make it pan-Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't want to see the Asia society to become an elitist group.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just as difficult as trying to do it in the mainstream, then most young people will not do it.
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent that I have time, and if my publication and writing career is relatively successful, then I will use that platform to help make the opportunities available for us to really start our own show. You see? So there's no more audition because we audition for ourselves. We just get together and do it,
I agree. I also want to ask, going back to your life experiences, the Fall of Saigon is getting close. It's on April 30th, the
Yes.
anniversary. And reflecting on your life experience witnessing the Fall of Saigon, what are your hopes for the future of Vietnam?
The hope for Vietnam now?
Yes.
The common hope, which most of us don't want to say because it gets us to cross the line of politics and we become political crusaders, but the situation has not been changed with China, except that you have China and Taiwan, so the needs are met. And with Korea, you have South Korea and North Korea, so the needs are met. Okay, if people don't want to do work in North Korea, they go to South Korea. Who wants to do business with North Korea? I don't know. I mean, you go there to get into trouble, So the problem with Vietnam now is that it's a single party country. So there's only one ruler, and that's the Communist Party. So if you do something that's not in line with the Communist Party, they're not going to let you do it. However, the country is open enough diplomatically and otherwise, and they like Vietnamese Americans to go back. So there are opportunities there, and this is addressed in my poetry series to paint the reality. The reality is that there's some who will go back to Vietnam for health, for retirement, for emotional, for recreation, whatever. There's some who will go back, and there are others who say no. The line is drawn. We don't want to have anything to do with a country that is a single party state controlled by the government. No matter how relaxed they're going to make it, it's still one boss. And we like a country that have a supplies of at least two parties like America. So there's some who will draw that line of identity, and all of this is presented in my policy, in my poetry. If not in the poetry itself, it will be in footnotes and notes and annotations to the poetry.
Nice. Thank you for giving us the honor to hear your story and your life experience. I want to close on one question. Are there any other things you would like to add that we have not covered yet?
Yes. Now, I want to say a little bit more about the poetry series. It might take me 2 years to get all 5 books out. It might take me 5 years, but it all relates back to the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is not a Vietnamese issue. It is part of U.S. history. And today, I checked AI. Now, this is the new thing. All right, not new anymore. It's been all over, but now it's officially, because when you do your Google search, it's going to show up AI. So AI says that the Vietnam War is very important to America, that it should be revisited and reviewed because our world continues to be a world at the risk of war. So Vietnam War is like up there as the priority in terms of historical review. All right. So my book will serve that purpose as outlined by AI. It just fits. So thanks, AI. Remember, AI is created by people.
Yes.
So when we say AI, actually is people manipulating a software or a computer.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it might take me 2 years to 5 years to get all 5 books of poetry out. And this is partly my memoir in poetry. But there are discussions of topics that will be of interest to people who are not Vietnamese or people from other ethnic communities. It's not all about the Vietnam War. Like the one huge book is going to be about the culture gap. So that's for all types of immigrants. Another book is about love. And people are interested in love, you know. So I hope that the series will have universal appeal. Even though it's in the context of the voice of a Vietnamese woman writing her memoir, I hope that this series will transcend the focus on me and my Vietnamese background.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.